Okay, now for our next session, Mike and I are going to do a deep dive into the new Microsoft 365 Management Pack for SCOM. Microsoft released this management pack, I believe it was in early August, as a way for organizations to monitor their Microsoft 365. So we're gonna dive into the management pack. We're going to first take a look at some of the pre-deployment considerations, including where to put the watcher node. The watcher node is a really important aspect of the management packet. Actually conducts the synthetic transactions that are going to be monitored. So real important considerations about the watcher node itself, some of the prereqs, where to put it, some of the permissions. Then we'll look at the setup of the management pack and some of the Azure tenant permissions that are required. We'll show you the operation of the MP and just do probably a pretty quick review of the reports and dashboards. Then show you some of the tuning capabilities of what you need to tune the management pack, enabling rules, changing the monitoring intervals, and show you how cookdown is working with that particular management pack. And then we're going to spend some time on troubleshooting. And so we've seen a number of posts on the blog where the Microsoft announced the 365 management pack, a number of questions that are being asked, and Mike is going to walk us through those questions and perhaps some things to consider when troubleshooting the management pack. So the first thing we're going to want to do before deploying the M365 management pack is to do a review of the contents of the management pack to get a better understanding of some of the data it's going to collect and perhaps some of the information that's going to be presented to us. I'm going to use the free MP Author tool from Silect, and let's go ahead and open up the management pack that we just downloaded. Now this is a sealed management pack, so we're not going to be able to make any changes to the contents of the management pack. But nevertheless, here we can review the various elements within the management pack. And so, for example, if I want to see classes or groups that are going to be created and defined by the management pack, I can see that here. And you see we have various classes related to M365 services, including Teams, SharePoint, licensing, etc. I can determine the discoveries that are defined within the management pack, including the watcher node, which is a very important element of the management pack. We can see folders, we can see monitors, and as you can see, there are quite a large number of monitors defined within the management pack. Looks like it's related to mail flow, SharePoint, networking, licensing, etc. As I scroll across, I can see additional information. Perhaps what I want to do is just look at it based on the type, so I can see aggregate monitors, dependency monitors, etc. I can look at rules that are defined within the management pack. So these are in many cases our event collection or other data collection rules. Perhaps what I want to do here is to see which rules are enabled versus which ones are not enabled. So here I can see out of the box there are 6 disabled rules, and it looks like these are rules related to message center data collection. So this would be collecting perhaps alert information from the M365 message center. Now, MP Author, this is a read-only. This is a sealed management pack, and in MP Author I'm not able to do any tuning. So if I flip over to my MP Studio console, and let me open up this management pack as well, and we'll get back to that same view of looking at the disabled rules defined within the management pack. And let's just do that same sort. And the benefit of using a tool like MP Studio is I can actually go ahead and create overrides. So if I wanted to enable these message center rules, I would be able to do so within the MP Studio console, and I could do that prior to deployment. So these would be sort of ready to go as soon as I deployed the MP. However, for this demonstration, I'm just going to leave the management pack as is. I'm not going to make any changes to it. I can look at tasks, I can look at views in the management pack. Now, if I have other teams or business units who are involved in the monitoring of a particular application or service, so in this example, perhaps I have a Microsoft 365 team who wants to get an appreciation of the management pack, the data it's going to collect, maybe some of the alerts that it's going to generate. There is another tool that I can use, the Select Operations Portal, to help in their review of that particular management pack. And so this provides a web-based interface similar to what we saw in both the MP Author product and MP Studio, where I have the ability to open up the management pack. So let's just go ahead and look for that 365 management pack. And of course, the benefit of being a web-based, I can easily share this information with the appropriate stakeholders. I can allow them to do their own review of the management pack. So here we can, as I said, get a very similar view to what we saw earlier in MP Author or MP Studio. I can review rules, monitors, discoveries, etc. And they can provide their assessment and perhaps recommendations for the management pack prior to deployment. When we are all set to go with deploying the management pack, we're simply going to right-click and deploy. Okay, we're going to switch over to the SCOM console where we've imported the new Microsoft 365 management pack. And let's go down to the admin section. And what you'll see is a new section entitled Microsoft 365. So this is where we're going to go configure the subscription to be monitored, as well as the watcher node, which is going to be the agent within our environment that's going to be used to conduct the synthetic transactions to be able to measure the service levels being provided by Microsoft 365. Now, there are a number of considerations, and so first of all, there are a number of permissions that are required in our Azure environment to enable the management pack to do its monitoring. And so here is the Microsoft 365 MP Operations Guide that comes with the MP, and this describes the various permissions required for each of the synthetic transactions. And so the appropriate personnel within your organization will need to go into the Azure tenant, need to go into Azure AD to be able to define these permissions for supporting the management pack and the necessary transactions. So that's a good thing to reference. Again, that's in the MP guide. And if these, there are a couple of ways that you can scope some of these permissions. So in this section, just above that table, there are some scoping you can do on both the Exchange permissions as well as the SharePoint permissions, and there's links to some articles for you to follow. This is critically important, of course, that the application has the necessary permissions to be able to do what it needs to do. So the guide is a real good reference in that regard. In terms of defining the watcher node, after we configure the subscription, the watcher node is, again, that agent that's going to be conducting the synthetic transactions. It's important that the watcher node, first of all, is able to communicate effectively with the M365 tenant, but then as well that it is located in areas within your organization that you want to monitor. So if you have a geographically dispersed organization, creating watcher nodes in the remote offices is probably a good idea. You can certainly have multiple watcher nodes all looking at the same subscription or even multiple subscriptions to be able to monitor the service levels that are being provided in various geographies within your organization. Another important consideration for the watcher node is to ensure it has connectivity to your Microsoft 365 environment. The MP guide contains the link to this article that talks about the M365 URLs and IP address ranges. If I scroll down, we'll see some more information about ports that are required. So this is another really good reference if the article for you as you plan your watcher node deployment. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to add a subscription to be monitored by the management pack. So I'm going to provide a name of the subscription. And now something I want to bring to your attention is this auto create Azure Service Principal, which is really the sort of the simplest way to go about adding a new subscription. You simply log in as an admin to your tenant. Let's just go ahead and do that. However, as you'll see in just a minute, this is going to fail. And the reason this is failing is very, very recently, I think as recently as last week, there was a change made on the Azure side. And that change in Azure is causing this operation to fail. As a result, you need to use the custom Azure Service Principal. So you need to manually configure the subscription in order to proceed. So what you'll need to do here is to work with your Azure AD team to create a new application registration for use by the M365 Management Pack. And it's an extra step that you need to take, and you need to ensure that you're properly copy and pasting information, specifically tenant ID, client ID, as well as client secret, which I'm going to go ahead and do now, and then we'll skip to the next screen. So I've added that information, the client, tenant, and client secret, to the configuration, and then I'm going to choose the management server pool, which is just the default value, and I'm going to go ahead and add the subscription to be monitored by the M365 Management Pack. Okay, so as the message indicates, the subscription is now ready for monitoring. We can go ahead and add a watcher node. So the first thing we're going to do after selecting Add Watcher Node is choose the agent. This is the SCOM agent we want to use as the watcher node. We'll tell it which subscription to monitor. We can optionally include to install the prereqs for Teams. I'm going to set this watcher node up to monitor everything. So let's go ahead and install the prereqs required for Teams. Next, it's going to verify the necessary prerequisites are installed on the watcher node. If not, we will be given an opportunity to install the necessary prerequisites. As you can see, everything is set to go, so we can continue on. These are the subscription endpoints. So it's necessary for the watcher node to be able to communicate properly with these endpoints. And there's a test connection button here that we can use that's going to go from the watcher node and ensure that it indeed can access these endpoints. And this is another area that that Microsoft has tried to smooth out the implementation by ensuring that you have connectivity between the watcher node and the appropriate endpoints in the Microsoft environment. So that looks like that's been successful. We can go ahead and click on Next. Okay, so next we're going to configure Mailflow monitoring. So we're going to, I've got both of these default checkboxes enabled. So we're going to enable M365 to M365 Mailflow. So let me put in a couple of email addresses to use for that particular synthetic transaction. I'm also going to monitor M365 to Exchange Mailflow. So this would be an on-prem hybrid scenario. And I'm going to put in the name of my Exchange server and Exchange mailboxes, passwords, etc. So we've got the Mailflow set up. In terms of the SharePoint document library, so here we're going to specify the document library to use and the SharePoint site to use. And so part of the synthetic transaction will be uploading and downloading files to and from SharePoint. So we're going to use the default library, and I'm going to again provide my SharePoint site name here. Next is going to be configuring Teams and network monitoring. For Teams, I do need to provide a valid team name as well as an existing channel name. So these, this default value will need to be changed. And it is best to check and make sure that that team name and channel exists before you proceed past this particular page. Finally, I'll configure license monitoring. As you can see, I have a drop down here to select which license SKU I want to monitor. We have a license verification email address, so we can verify that this user is indeed licensed for M365. Location name, address to look up. That location name is just something used in the reports that you'll see. This location address is something you can use to look up. So I'm going to, as you'll see in one of the reports, there is a geo mapping of where your watcher nodes are located, and it's going to use this information that I looked up and these coordinates to map that particular watcher node point. When I'm finished, I can review the configuration and I can go ahead and click Finish. That's going to complete the setup of the watcher node. So at this point in time, the watcher node should be up and running if the configuration was done properly. Now, in the case it isn't running properly, and as you can see in my screen here, I'm getting a red status message beside my watcher node. If something isn't configured properly, or if there's a problem with the watcher node, the first place to go look is the event log on the watcher node. And so I've got that loaded here. I'm looking in the Operations Manager section on the machine I designated as the watcher node. And this is a great place to look if you're having any issues at all with that watcher node. And as I scroll down here, I see a number of informational messages, but I also see an error message. And if I bring up that error message, and I'm going to just move this up a little bit and get some more details. There's a problem with mail flow exchange to M365. And here we can see in the error message the email was not sent or received. It attempted to do that 10 times and got an error message. The sender is listed here and some additional information. So there was a problem sending mail from Exchange to M365. In my particular case, I purposely don't have my Exchange system up and running to generate this error message. But really just wanted to highlight the fact that this event log is really a great resource to use when looking at problems that you might be having with your watcher node. There's some good detail that's available for most of the events that we log, and typically look for events in the 900 range. So here you can see, some of the errors as we see 955, 956. You see a bunch of other error messages in that 900 range. Most of those in the 900 range will be related to the watcher node and the M365 configuration of the watcher node. So now that we have the M365 MP deployed, configured, and operational within our environment, let's take a look at some of the dashboards and reports that it makes available to us. So you'll see a couple of new folders have been added. I'm looking at the SCOM web console here. We see a couple of new folders that have been added. M365 dashboards is the first one we're going to take a look at. And they have broken out the dashboards across the various services that are offered by Microsoft 365. So if we start by looking at the Exchange mail flow performance, we're able to see some metrics of both M365 mail flow as well as hybrid mail flow. One thing I'll point out that within each of these dashboards across the top, you see a number of drop downs. If I had multiple watcher nodes across multiple locations, I would be able to select the appropriate one here. I can also select a time period, so if I need a more granular look and want to pinpoint a specific issue, perhaps I can change the time period. And as well, I can focus just on a specific set of transactions for each of these dashboards. So they're quite customizable in that way. If I look at the geo view, this is going to show me a map which is going to specify my watcher nodes. In this example, I've only got the one watcher node, but if you did have multiple watcher nodes, you would see them and their location. That location was specified when you initially set up the watcher node. And you can see the state of the watcher nodes in there. I think there's some hover text here as well. So that would be good to give you more of an organizational overview of your M365 service. And now we drop into some of the other services that are monitored by the management pack. I can see some connection time and ping times for the various services offered by M365. Here's some SharePoint performance metrics, download time, upload time, etc. Again, I can get much more granular if I need to pinpoint a specific issue. Teams network assessment, showing us the round trip, some jitter, packet loss rate, etc. And then the last of these M365 dashboards showing us some more details on Teams performance. So in addition to the M365 dashboards, let's hop over to the SCOM console. I have a number of new reports, quite a number of new reports available through the console, and these cover the various areas of things being monitored by the management pack. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but here's a consumed license dashboard. I can see any errors or any alerts that are being generated by this particular license monitoring capability. We can see some mail flow information and reports down here. Performance views across each of the major services that are being monitored by the management pack, email, SharePoint, Teams, etc. And yeah, some more details about SharePoint and some more details about the Teams monitoring capability within the M365 management pack. So next I wanted to show you some tuning for the M365 management pack. So if you have it installed and running properly, perhaps you want to tune down some of the alerts, perhaps you want to change the monitoring intervals. A couple ways we can go about doing that. And I guess the first thing I would do is refer you to the documentation. The MP guide, if we just scroll down, has an entire section devoted to cookdown and monitoring intervals. And it just talks about how cookdown works in a general sense, but how it applies to monitors and rules that are used within the M365 management pack. And in a nutshell, basically changing a single monitor or rule and changing the interval will not stop that workflow from running at the frequency that was predetermined. So in this particular example, let's say we wanted to tune down the Teams network assessment. And by using the guide, I can see the rules and monitors that are associated with that particular set of data. And what I can do is I can flip over to the SCOM console. We can, let's just do a search on some of the monitors related to Microsoft Teams. And if I wanted to begin tuning down, let's say the monitoring interval, what I would need to do is to go about changing, creating some overrides and changing the monitoring intervals for the group of monitors that was described in the manual. So there are a few of them. And so I wanted to show you another way of doing that is I'm going to go back to using the MP Studio tool that we saw a little bit earlier. I'm going to look at the installed M365 management pack. And let's go look at the monitors. And what I'm going to do in this instance is I'm going to group the monitors based on their target. Since I'm only interested in changing the Teams monitor, I'm going to open up and see the monitors related to Microsoft Teams. If I flip back to my guide, I can see there are, let me see, there are these 5 monitors that I need to tune. So I believe these are the 5 that we need to tune. I'm going to right-click, Manage Overrides, and what I can do here is change the monitoring interval. Let's select the M365 Override Management Pack, and let's change that monitoring interval to something other than 900. We could double that interval. And so what we would need to do is to do the same thing for the rules. So again, if we look back at the documentation, we can see there are 4 performance collection rules that we need to tune. And I open up the Teams. I saw there were 4 rules: jitter, loss, ratio, and trip. And I can create overrides for those as well. Use that same M365 Override Management Pack, change that interval. And so by doing this, I am going to adjust the monitoring interval for everything using that data source. And as a result, it's now going to collect and assess some of those Teams characteristics on a basis that's twice as long as it was originally. I think originally it was 15 minutes. It would now be 30 minutes where it would collect that information from Teams.